Well, I don't know about you, but I'm probably going to have a sandwich for lunch today when I go home. Who doesn't love a good sandwich? Two pieces of bread on the outside, your favorite, veggies, meat, cheese, condiments on the inside, or maybe you just love peanut butter and jelly. I love sandwiches. I think most people do. Everybody likes eating a sandwich, but have you ever thought about reading one? Well, that's what we're doing today. We're reading a sandwich. Now, I know that there is another fancy literary name for it, and I can't remember what that is, but basically, a sandwich is when a writer has two stories that he puts them together by starting one story and then stopping that one, putting the other story in the middle, and then coming back and finishing the other story. The writer of the Gospel of Mark loved to do this. There's a lot of these in this gospel, and it's really a way of making sure that we get the message so that we don't just hear the details of a story, but we really understand the meaning. So this story within a story is so full of meaning, so bursting with ideas that we don't want to miss. And these two stories are about healing, but they're about real emotional, spiritual, and social healing. They're about changing the person and the culture. They're about not accepting the status quo, that kind of healing. So our story starts out when Jesus has crossed again on the boat to the other side. That's how it begins. Catherine Matthews reminds us there's a hidden meaning in descriptions of crossing over the sea. One side of the sea, in this case, was Jewish territory, and the other was Gentile. And so you would feel the tension, the risk, the danger in going to some place that is less hospitable, less comfortable, maybe less safe. So crossing over the sea, crossing over out of one's comfort zone. And it's funny in these stories, it always seems to be a little bit stormy when we're told they crossed over to the other side of the sea. Storms and dangers were something that the early Christians reading these stories would have understood both physically and metaphorically. They faced difficult challenges in their lives. They took risk of opening themselves to people who were other. And as the church reached out to not only the Jewish population, but the Gentile population, they were crossing over. So today we're entering another boundary crossing story, and an important change is taking place. Things get busy as soon as they cross over. They step out on dry land, and a local leader begs Jesus to come right away and heal his daughter who is dying. And they start to move in that direction, but on the way, with a crowd surrounding them, a woman who has been suffering from hemorrhages comes up, just hoping that she might be able to touch Jesus' clothes, hoping that she might have some healing from her suffering. 12 years. This woman has been suffering for 12 years, and her condition made her a social outcast. She was religiously unclean, not just for 1 week or 1 month or a few months, always throughout her life for 12 years. The temple, the center of her religious community, was off limits to her. Basically, she couldn't go to church. She could not touch or be touched by anyone else, or she would cause them to be unclean. And by the time she had encountered Jesus, she had spent every penny she had. And we are told she endured much under many physicians in the hopes of finding relief, but her bleeding had only worsened. Anyone with a chronic condition can relate to that part of the story. Just feeling that frustration of getting poked and prodded and tested with no answers, no relief. And if we can imagine losing blood for 10 years, it would physically exhaust a person. She would be iron deficient, feeling as if her life was just draining away. And there would be that ongoing physical pain and discomfort, but really, worst of all, the feeling of isolation that comes with being considered unclean and all the taboos around it. So at this point in her life, she was alone in the world. She was embarrassed and lonely beyond description. So pushing through her fears, she's saying to herself, if I only touch his clothes, surely I will be made well. And she was right. And her hemorrhage stopped. She could feel it. And Jesus sensed something happening. And looking out into the crowd, he asks, who touched me? And she could tell. She knew what had happened to her. And she came in fear and trembling to tell him that it was her. Debbie Thomas describes it this way. In a desperate and stunning act of civil disobedience, this woman defied the rules of her day to pursue an encounter with Jesus. She knew she had no business even polluting the crowd around her with her presence. She knew she was forbidden to touch any man. She knew that even her fingertips on his clothes would defile him, but she was desperate and hopeful, and she decided to do it anyway. And Jesus felt both her weariness and her hope, and he too ignores the social taboos. He insisted on hearing more. He insisted that this woman come forward and tell her whole story, her whole truth. He knew she had spent 12 long years having other people impose their narratives on her, impose their assumptions and their prejudices, and shamed into silence by bad religion. Jesus knew how desperately she needed someone to listen, to understand, and someone to bless her whole truth in the presence of the larger community. So this is what he did. Somehow, he knew what science now has come to understand. It is an essential part of our healing to tell our stories, to be heard, and to know that we can be heard and still be loved and still be accepted and still be included back into community, no matter what shameful things we feel are in our story. We notice he didn't whisper to her, don't be so loud, keep it to yourself. Let's just keep this story between you and me. No one needs to know. Jesus shares her story with everyone because he knew what she needed. She needed him to affirm the validity of her story and herself and her faith and her place in community. Sadly, some of us, you may have learned through experience that maybe it's not safe to tell your truth. It is still true that women who are abused or left in poverty, who try to share their pain, are not affirmed. They're rejected and told to keep quiet and go home and try not to be a problem. But Jesus wanted his followers to live differently. Jesus wanted the church to be something different. A place to truly heal, a place where people do listen and affirm and help each other heal. This, I think, is the most important part of this story, the most important message that is here, but it is not the only message. The Mark comes back to finish our sandwich, and we notice this other woman, the one in need of healing now, is young. The daughter of Jairus is just 12 years old. Now there's another hidden message in our story. The girl is 12. The woman has suffered for 12 years. Now we remember there are 12 disciples. There are 12 tribes of Israel. 12 is meaningful in another way. It represents completeness, and it represents connectedness to God. These people were deeply connected to God. And we begin to realize that the older woman has been bleeding during this girl's entire lifetime. And just as the girl is about to become an adult, illness has struck her down, leaving her father desperate. The neighbors have given up on her, pronouncing her dead. They come and say there's no point in Jesus defiling himself by touching a body. After all, it's just a girl. You don't need to come. But he does. And he heals again with touch. He took her by the hand. He said, "Little girl, get up." And the girl gets up and she walks around to the amazement of all around her. Again, Debbie Thomas's words describe beautifully what is happening here, what is so deep within this story. In Jairus' story, Jesus demands that we do not pronounce death where God sees life. He demands that legalism must give way to compassion every time. In each story, Jesus restores a child of God to community, to health, to family, to God. In each story, Jesus touches what is considered impure in order to practice mercy. In public, he touched a bleeding woman, which was disgusting in the eyes of the law. He insisted that the gesture be public. She tries to just touch him secretly, but he calls her out, knowing she shouldn't have been in the crowd in the first place. But Jesus virtually proclaims that she and he have touched. And instead of her polluting him, he has purified her. And then he takes a corpse by the hand, touching that other great pollutant in their society, a dead body, and he goes out of his way for a little girl. So this story asks us a few questions. What boundaries has this trip with Jesus over the sea crossed? What boundaries has he changed and pushed? What envelope has he pushed? The social boundaries that leave any people out. No one is beyond God's love. Women are to be treated as equals and with equal respect. Illness, even terminal illness, is not a curse. Social or religious rules or beliefs that ostracize any group of people, they're over. Their time is done. And because of this border crossing that Jesus does, we are called to break through social boundaries, change societal expectations, challenge the status quo any time that gender or race or tragic circumstances or physical or mental illness are used to label or treat someone as less than, as unimportant, as unworthy of love and respect. And the other question, so why did Mark give us this sandwich, telling us these stories together? These stories tell us who we are meant to be and how we are meant to live. We are meant to be creating a safe space for each of us to tell our whole story, to be known and accepted and healed and embraced in community. So that allows us to ask, is there a part of your story that you need to tell? A part of your story that you need to know is affirmed and accepted, that allows you to be yourself in community? Is there someone in your life who needs you to listen and to really hear without any fear of judgment their story and their pain so that they would be able to heal? This is how Jesus brought healing into the lives of those around him. This is how we can heal and grow and not just survive, but thrive in this life that God has given us. This is our message and this is our calling.